a job in Allentown, Pennsylvania. It's a beautiful part of the country.
Yeah. Certainly beautiful. We just, our winters seem to last forever.
And truth be known, when we retired from San Jose, California, where the weather is like it is today, and that we moved to Reno, Nevada, and we were told by people that lived there, the winters aren't bad. And I really didn't want to move someplace in retirement where I was shoveling a lot of snow. So the first 4 years, the weather was, during the winter, was acceptable. It wasn't bad. But year 5, oh, what a shocker that was. I went out on the deck one time and we had 32 inches of snow and it didn't melt for about 8 weeks. It was a miserable, and people going outdoors would slip and fall on the ice and that. And, so when my son moved to the Bay Area and that, we said, that's it, we're going to relocate. Reno's nice, but we'll get rid of the winter.
Smart man. That's, yeah, I agree with you. If I could have 75 degrees and sunny and beautiful every day, I'd move straight to San Diego if I could.
Yeah. So Dwight, you had a little surgery?
I'm sorry?
You had a little surgery?
Yes, you can tell. Right, yeah.
Yeah. Same time you had yours, I had mine on top of my head and that, so.
Not as visible.
Not as visible. Well, I don't know, thinning hair. So you should know that Dwight and I haven't actually seen each other for some 54 years. We've communicated email.
Oh.
This is the first time we've actually seen each other in 54 years.
Oh man, well, happy reunion. That's fantastic.
Thank you. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah. Well, awesome. I'm glad that we were able to get this together then.
Yeah, pretty neat.
Yeah, totally. We've been fortunate. You say fortunate, but like through the pandemic, we sort of transitioned from being just in person to this sort of live programs that we do every Monday night. And, we never have a shortage of veterans and stories and people on. And, we've reached out and had people from all around the world join us, and it's been incredible that the footprint has been able to grow like that and have so many different stories and voices on from everywhere.
And the remarkable thing is that you afford the opportunity for people to tell their stories.
Yeah. It's the mission here is really unbeatable. I've only been with VBC about 2 years, but I was really, really touched by this organization whenever I attended my first in-person 2 years ago. And, I was lucky enough to start working here after the pandemic started. And, it's been an educational experience and inspiring throughout, really.
That's great. That's great. Really, you're serving a better need. I don't think anybody does it any better than you do.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm sure I'll pass that along to Todd because I'm sure he would be very happy to hear that. And he's apologized that he's not able to come tonight. I'm going to start the program in about a minute, but he said, "Hey, can you take care of tonight?" And I was telling Dwight before you came on that my dad was an air traffic controller, but there's a lot that I need to learn tonight because I knew nothing about weapons controllers. I didn't even know that weapons controllers and aircraft controllers were different even in the military. So I had a lot of questions.
And one thing I'll say before we actually start is that Dwight actually stayed in the Air Force longer than I was. 4 years and 4 months. Dwight stayed on in, attempted to make a career in the Air Force, but he went airborne after I left. So there's a whole segment that's not in my book that Dwight can talk about.
Excellent. All right. Well, I'm going to start the music here and we'll let everybody in.
Okay.
Here we go. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to VBC Happy Hour for Monday, April 4th. My name is Sean Hall. I'm the Director of Programming here with the VBC. We are a nonprofit in Western PA, for those of you joining us for the first time, whose mission is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. We have an interesting program lined up for you tonight. We have joining us will be Paul Hauser, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Paul. Is that correct?
That's
Paul
correct.
Hauser?
That's
Great.
correct.
Paul
Yep.
Hauser. He is the author of Inherently Dangerous. We're going to dive into this book in just a few short minutes. And joining him will be Dwight Menard. Dwight is, both of them are Air Force veterans. We have some interesting stories to tell, and a lot of things that I had no idea about that we were just chatting about in the green room that I get to learn about tonight. So I'm very excited. Ptsd, executive director, was unable to join tonight. He had a separate commitment. So I am, as they say in Star Trek, taking the con. So I'll be on with everyone here tonight. Welcome to everybody. It's so great to see you all. Ben, it's great to see you back. Welcome back. Brad, always a pleasure. Jack Morrow, welcome. World War II veteran. Julia, always a pleasure. Julia is our resident 101-year-old who was a Navy wave in World War II, helped crack the Enigma code. Leo West, to see you're sporting the VBC hat. I decided to take a break from my hat so I don't have hat hair consistently. But I'm glad that you're with us, Leo. I'm going to pop over and say a thank you to our sponsors here. Here we go. I'm going to share my screen. I was saying we usually have someone on the back end, but we got it all figured out tonight. And at least I'm starting the program unmuted, which is a great thing. But as long as everybody can see that, that's D&D, Metal Recycling and Auto Salvage. They've been sponsoring the VBC for quite some time now. We're really appreciative and thankful for them. They began as a small hauling and used auto parts operation in the Pittsburgh area here in the late 70s. And they've grown into a full-service metal recycling company with 2 locations in Lawrenceville and Tarentum. D&D accept all types of metal, both ferrous and non-ferrous. They may be that may be generated by industrial manufacturing, construction, demolition, small commercial entities, as well as individual customers. They have a wide variety of material handling equipment and are capable of managing any job in a timely and efficient manner. They are also super friendly. So if you need to contact them for quotes or availability, you can do that at D&D autosalvage.com, D&D autosalvage.com. I'll put the link into the chat. Thank you to them. And also, we have tobacco-free Adagio Health as one of our sponsors. I'm going to be doing a scuttlebutt. I'm going to talk about our podcast here in a second, but they're going to be coming on to the VBC podcast, which I host, called The Scuttlebutt, to talk about quitting smoking. And they are dedicated to preventing and reducing tobacco use and for getting the word out about the hazard of smoking and secondhand smoke. They're all about health. So they want people to quit. They have classes, nicotine replacement therapy, and a popular quit line that is 1-800-QUIT-NOW. They also educate people, children especially, about tobacco use, from cigarettes, cigars, pipes, chews, snuff, and other nicotine products like vaping. There's actually a children's book that my 2-year-old daughter reads that has somebody smoking in it. Every time we see it, we go, blah. And she goes, blah, every time she sees it now, which is really cute. But finally, tobacco-free Adagio Health advocates for public and private policies that ensure healthy places to live, work, and play. You can learn all about them at tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. And if you can see this, we have a VBC magazine that's out right now. We're actually already starting to work on the next VBC magazine. That's how quick the turnaround is. So we make sure that we are bringing you guys your quarterly magazine. This is a free magazine. So if you are not receiving it, all you have to do is email us your address, and we'll make sure to get this into the mail to you. Free magazine. And there are very good reviews on this magazine. It's written mostly by Executive Director Todd DiPastino. He's fantastic at it. This particular issue, as you can see at the bottom, the Cold War at 75, really good article. But everybody I've talked to has read it cover to cover and just loves it. So please contact us if you'd like your free copy. You also get that by becoming a member, and you can do that by going to our website. And I want to talk about what's coming up in the next couple of weeks, because we just put our Wednesday morning coffee hour on hiatus. Our last one for the winter was last Wednesday. So from this point on, don't be afraid if you try to join us on Wednesday morning and we're not here. That's on purpose. But next Monday, April 11th at 7 p.m., Greg Bozek commanded armored infantry in West Germany and was also plans officer with the Joint Staff. He'll be joining us to tell his story next Monday. Then the 18th, the following Monday, we will be taking a break. So we will not be on the 18th. Mark your calendar. And we'll be back on Monday, April 25th. This will be really interesting. U.S. Air Force veteran and author James Rosen. He will be coming on to talk about his battlefield Ukraine. Now, I believe this is a book that is a fiction. They're saying this is how World War III could start if a war started in Ukraine. Well, we kind of all know where that is at right now. And Ben, thank you for messaging me. You say you quit cold turkey back when while you were in the military, when you quit smoking. And it's a good point, because Don Nemchek, who is here with us on the program tonight, he also quit smoking, I believe in the 90s. He's going to join us on that Tobacco-Free Adagio Health podcast, because I think it's going to be interesting to hear a veteran's take, as smoking is pretty prevalent in the military, of his ability to be able to stop smoking at that time. And only one more announcement, the scuttlebutt that came out. Oh, Don, real quick, your hand is up. Hold on, you're muted. Let's ask you to unmute.
All right. Sean, thank you for the mention of the quit smoking scuttlebutt. I think it's very important for us to hear it. And just from my perspective of it, I also quit cold turkey. My wife and I quit in New Year's Eve, 1999. And I'll tell my story on the scuttlebutt just to kind of tease it a little bit for the attendees. But I think they'll find it interesting, because I come from a background of a long-time smokers, and I'll let it go at that. So we'll tease it a little bit more, and hopefully we'll get some interest in our scuttlebutt program. However, I do want to mention something about the magazine. I've had a lot of success on some guerrilla marketing. I leave it at the post office lobby, the library, some coffee shops and cafes that I've gone to, some barber shops in my local area, and it's been extremely well received. Everybody thanks me for leaving them there and says, boy, I hope you'll bring more, because I'm kind of following through and see if there's any left in the locations that I dropped them off to, and almost all of them are gone. So Todd and I are going to meet tomorrow. He's going to replenish my supply. I'm going to take another box out and hit the streets a little bit more, replenish those supplies. So I think that's a good way of the fellas, if our attendees are interested in getting that magazine, I drop a couple off at the barber shop or the post office, and get the word out, because that is a great publication. And I've heard back from so many of my friends and shipmates and stuff like that I've sent it out to, and they can't wait to receive it every quarter.
That's great. And I also know that you said that you were walking the mall and we were handing them out to the guys who are sitting there waiting for their wives to come back from shopping. And they're all like, yeah, great. I got something to read now. So.
Exactly. There's several tables and chairs in front of Macy's out in South Hills Village. And my wife wanted to go shopping one day. So I had the magazines with me. I said, I'm just going to plop them down here on these little tables and see if there's any response to it. And sure enough, most of the guys are our era, and they had something to read. So I'm going to keep that type of thing up. And so just being creative, doing a little bit of guerrilla marketing, getting that magazine out, serves no purpose sitting in Todd's garage. So we'll get it out on the street and get the guys interested.
Well, thank you so much, Don. And for the next Scuttlebutt, which just actually released today, we talked with two representatives, one from the Stella Center, and another from For the Love of a Veteran, a nonprofit organization. So you can see there on your screen, the lower left, that's Sean Messett. He is from For the Love of a Veteran. And on the lower right is Valerie Groth. She's from the Stella Center. They have a sort of a revolutionary new treatment for PTSD. One sec. And that treatment, oops, sorry, here we go. That treatment involves doing an injection into the neck. You can see all of this in our links for the podcast, and they inject an anesthetic into the stellate ganglion. It's called the stellate ganglion block, the shot. And this nerve center is connected to the amygdala. And what it does is the shot sort of turns off the fight or flight for someone dealing with PTSD and a lot of anxiety and always feeling like they are turned on. It sort of calms that and allows them to process things. It's not widely known at this point, but both of our guests have had that shot. And though Valerie is not a veteran and Sean is, Sean swears by it. And so does Valerie, to be fair. And you can find out all of that information from them by watching the podcast. And there are links to the 60 minutes that it was presented on, the shot, as well as a YouTube series that was developed around it, and a couple articles that we posted. So you can find all of that information by checking out the Scuttlebutt on our website. And I'll put the link here in the chat as well for that. But as for this evening, this is one of the first pictures we'll get to in just a couple minutes. Thank you all for your patience while we go through all of our announcements. And I want to welcome Paul Hauser and Dwight Menard to the program. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us for VBC Happy Hour tonight.
Good, we're glad to be here.
Yeah, and you said, Paul, before we went live, you said this is you and Dwight know each other, but this is the first time you've seen each other in 52 years?
54 years, yeah.
54 years.
Yeah, pretty amazing. We had communicated on email. And Dwight, how long ago? 3 years ago we connected? Something like that. I don't even remember what brought about our connection in that, but this is the first time we've been face to face, so pretty interesting. Yeah.
Well, that's great. And Dwight appears in your book, is that right?
Oh, yes. Well, he actually, there are some stories written about change names and that, but yeah, definitely Dwight is in there. I'm going to add one thing about Dwight that I've always admired over the years, and that when we first met in the Philippines as controllers in that, Dwight had this uncanny ability to read a text manual and then months later remember it by paragraph or page and that, the technical data and that. And I always thought this guy is nothing short of a genius to be able to do that. Well, he had what I called a photographic memory. Now, Dwight, I don't know if you remembered that, but you impressed the hell out of me when you were able to do that.
Do you remember that, Dwight?
No, I don't.
Well, Paul, I want to start tonight because when Todd told me that I was going to be hosting, I sort of looked at what was going on and checked out what the topic would be. And I saw, okay, weapons controllers. Well, what is that? And you do such a great job of defining that right here at the beginning of the book that I just wanted to read it for those who may not know, because I sure didn't. And what's interesting is that my dad, his whole career, he was an air traffic controller. In fact, he just retired recently from being a contractor with the Coast Guard. So he's down in North Carolina as a controller down there. But the responsibility for the identification and control of airborne aircraft throughout the world is known as airspace management. In the Air Force, reconnaissance, strategic, and tactical aircraft are considered weapons. Personnel trained in maneuvering aircraft from the ground or in the air for combat purposes are known as weapons controllers. Most civilians know that an air traffic controller keeps aircraft apart. A weapons controller drives aircraft together, which often is inherently dangerous. And that is where I was like, oh, okay, that makes so much more sense now and makes me so much more terrified. But I figured before we dive into that, Paul, we could ask you when did you enlist and why?
Oh, well, boy, that goes back quite some time. I had graduated from college, university, and my father was the manager of the San Bernardino Chamber of Commerce in Southern California. And he sent me a note and said a member of the local draft board said that my name was coming up for the draft. And I had a couple options at that time. I could wait to be drafted, or with a degree, I could probably apply for a commission. So I remember thinking about it. Do I want to go in the Navy, the Marines, the Army, the Air Force? And it didn't take me long to decide that I thought the Air Force was better for my particular nature. I certainly didn't want to be on the ground in combat, that type of warfare and that. But I thought possibly the Air Force. Mm-hmm. And so I went to the local recruiter, signed up, wound up in Officers Candidate School at Lackland Air Force Base, and received my gold bars, second lieutenant in that, and was assigned, first assignment was to aerospace munitions at Lowry Air Force Base. I got there and there was a 5-week wait. And I didn't like that at all. And I was bored silly on that. And one day I was in the commanding officer's bivouac area and that. And posted on the bulletin board was this urgent notice. They were recruiting or wanting Air Force officers for weapons controlling. So I read it and I thought, that sounds interesting. So I copied down the information, went into the commanding officer's office and talked to him a little bit and said, I'd like to volunteer for this. So long story short, in about another week and a half, I was on my way to Tyndall Air Force Base, the school for weapons controlling.
And what was that training like?
Dwight, where did you have your training? Yours wasn't at Tyndall, was it?
No, I went to Keesler.
Keesler, okay. Keesler had a big school too in that.
Right.
Tyndall was fabulous, I thought. What about Keesler? Did you like it?
No.
Also, no, not really. I like Tyndall.
A great place to be.
Why not?
It was Mississippi. My daughter was born there. I tell her, when people ask where you born, tell her Keesler Air Force Base. And if they say, where's that? And they really push you, then you can say Mississippi.
Where did you grow up, Dwight? Because if you didn't have that high of opinion of Mississippi, where did you grow up?
In Vermont.
Okay, so for those of you joining us tonight, Dwight is coming to us from Vermont right now. So you moved back up home.
Right.
Yeah.
Now Tyndall was really nice. I enjoyed that. That was down on the Gold Coast of Florida, and that the beaches were wonderful. Warm weather in that. The school I thought was well run in that. And the people I was associated with there, I thought were wanting to learn this new field, relatively new at the time, and I thought everything was sailing along a-okay. And so I totally enjoyed it. Officers Club, what can you beat? Officers Club near the beach, fresh seafood. I rented a place right on the beach while I was there. I had a pretty good life. I admitted in that. And then the first assignment was right there at Eglin Air Force Base. So I literally drove my car less than 50 miles to my first assignment at Eglin Field number 3. And that's where Doolittle and his bombers practice on Field 3 for the USS Hornet mission to Japan and that. And I remember our radar site was set up in a Quonset hut very close to the field itself. And the field still had the markers on it in, I believe, 25 or 50 foot increments with white flags. And you could just visualize a bomber sitting at the end of 450 feet, ramping up, twin engine bomber, till it was like to shake apart, and then going down that runway and taking off within 425 or 450 feet, which was the length of the Hornet at the time. So it was a good place to be for the first assignment. And I think most of the people enjoyed it in that. And we were tactical. So that meant we were deployable then anywhere in the world. Technically speaking, we could box up all of our equipment within 2 days, load it on transports, and fly anywhere in the world and be set up in another 2 days.
Ben Wright chimed in here. Ben Wright is a pilot, veteran, Air Force veteran from Vietnam. He said, "Were our guests in the 7th ACCC Squadron Flying Capsule C-130s?"
Yes, I was in it for 1 year. January 71, January 72.
Ben, does that align with yours?
I was in theater later, but the 7th Act had moved from Vietnam to Clark at that point in time. So I knew several of the folks from the 7th Act at Clark.
Thanks. So Paul, did you have to have like training time on site before you could be deployed?
No, I wouldn't exactly say that. What we did once we set up at Eglin Field in that is we were prepared to go on training missions in that. And we did one to Fort Leonard Wood in the middle of winter with the Army. Bivouacked out in the field, I remember, cold as can be, snow on the ground and that. And that was like a 2-week training course. Then we got back to Eglin Field in that, and then a war broke out in the Dominican Republic. And that was very unusual. President Johnson, I remember at the time, kind of panicked. He didn't want to see another Cuba takeover. So he authorized the 82nd Airborne to go in to rescue the American citizens. There were about 1,200 of them, get them out of the country. And we were authorized to go in. And who could forget this? I had taken some leave and I was in South America and I was flying back, space available, on a C-54 from Recife, Brazil, into Florida. And the pilot, or I think it was a co-pilot, came walking down the aisle, and we had a general with us and some of his staff on board. And he said, there's an awful lot of radio traffic. It's happening. Something's going on in the Dominican Republic and that. So the general wrote something out and said, I want you to radio this information into Homestead, where we were headed. And the next thing I know, we had an airborne emergency. Well, we were having problems with one of the engines. So the pilot declared an emergency and we went into Antigua. We landed there and I remember the general got off real quick and I think he caught a commercial flight back into Florida real quick. I didn't think much about it. I stayed with the aircraft crew because I still had a couple of days of leave and that wasn't particularly in a rush to get back. The plane was repaired. The next day we took off, went into Homestead, and then I caught a hop over to Tyndall. And no sooner had I got in and checked in with the officer of the day when he said, we've shipped out to the Dominican Republic to the San Isidro Air Force Base, and we've got one more cargo plane going in 2 hours. So if you can get here in time, you can hop on it. So here I'd come back from a couple of weeks overseas and tired in that I just swapped bags and got out to the airport and got on the flight. The next thing I knew, we were set up in a command report center right at the airport, controlling all the air traffic going in and out of Santo Domingo and that. So we had pretty much hands-on experience all along. We did a lot of practicing. I think your question is, were we prepared? And we were. There were always unusual circumstances, though. And as I said in my book, there were some real strange things that happened from time to time. I'll never forget being at the scope in Panama City or Field 3 and looking down and seeing automobile traffic on the freeway down in New Orleans. And that meant that the radar waves were being up in the atmosphere, being bent down onto the landmass, and I could actually see automobile traffic on the highway leading into New Orleans and that. And of course, another one was a phenomenal airspeed of an aircraft out over the Caribbean Sea. And the major at the time said that that could be what turned out to be the SR-71 being tested in those days. So yeah, and the equipment itself, I can't say was always 100% operational in that, but maybe Dwight could tell you about what it was like sitting in front of a scope with all the air conditioning and the heat.
Oh, I bet. No, I was going to ask, that was one of my questions, is what were the systems like at that time? I mean, I've been privy as a kid when my dad would take me up into the tower and you could see all the radar rooms and all that stuff back when you were allowed to bring your kids, in as a controller. But what were the systems like when you were in?
Well, the systems that we used were actually not very modern. Okay, we had some old radar sets, but they were pretty good for what we needed. And we had some very modern equipment we hooked to the old radars that made it much easier to control. Now, I saw a question come up: what attributes are required to be a weapons controller? At the time we came in, you had to be a second lieutenant or higher. You had to be able to pass a class 2 flight physical. That means you're not quite the same physical requirements as a pilot, but close. We were excused on visual acuity, but you had to have good color vision and all that. And basically you had to have pretty good hand-eye coordination. It's almost an athletic event or a computer game or whatever you want to call it. Driving these blips through the sky so they smash into each other or don't smash into each other, whichever you want them to do. And you also have to be able to work under a great deal of pressure. You may have as many as 20 aircraft on your frequency. And if you're doing aerial refuelings, they're coming very, very fast. And you have to get everybody on the tanker. You can't miss.
Mhm.
If you do, it's very, very bad. Okay.
I,
After you've done it for a while, you can't miss, because even if you miss the first time, you know how to save the mission. Do we have rest hours like pilots? No. When I was on ABCCC, pilots were restricted to 80 hours a month. Controllers were not restricted. We could fly as many hours as they could schedule us. And I did some of the scheduling, and we did okay. Generally, we'd fly every third night. And then we had ground duties on one of our days.
When you say, sorry to interrupt, Dwight, when you say you had to fly every third night and then ground duties, what did those two things mean?
Okay. There's a great deal of preparation prior to the mission. You have to know who's coming, where they're going, what they're going to do, who they're going to work with. Okay.
Mhm.
Example, maybe you're going to get a flight of 3 Navy A7s. You know about when they're coming. So you got to find a target for them if they don't already have one. Or you might have a flight of 4 F4s or 4 F105s. Same thing. You got to find a target for them. Now, your targets will generally be generated by FACs, forward air controllers. And at night over Lao, they were generally flying in O2s or OV10s. However, the AC-130s could also FAC, that, forward air control. If they had fighters, okay, if you got a C-130 and he had a tank, well, the C-130's armament was not enough to kill the tank. So he'd call an F-4 with a bomb. And then he would identify the tank by firing maybe a 20 millimeter at the tank. And when the rounds hit the tank, they sparkled. And that's what the pilot aimed at. The AC-130 didn't have the marking rockets that the O2s or OV-10s had. Now, I flew at night, okay? The guys who flew the day shift had a similar mission, but it was also very different. The guys who flew up north in what was called barrel roll had an entirely different mission. It was almost like a different war. They worked with Vang Pao and his Hmong army. And they kept the Hmong army in business. It was very difficult. And it was dry season, rainy season. The missions just worked back and forth. Now, where I worked, we were working on what was called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. We were trying to stop it. We had sensors planted. So the sensor would pick up the sound of a truck. And the next sensor would pick it up again. So we knew about which direction it was heading and about how fast it was going. And we'd try to get an F-4 there with a bomb. Or preferably a Navy A6. They're very accurate. The Navy A7s are very accurate. The Air Force F-4 is the reason that we had to develop smart bombs, because the only thing you could say about a bomb coming from an F-4 is it's going to hit the ground. They were not accurate.
Larry Guggens flew F-4s. He's with us on the program tonight. Does that sound a bit accurate, Larry? I'm not sure if you're with us, able to unmute.
I can unmute, and he's absolutely correct. Yeah, the original F-4s and then even the E model did not have a sophisticated bombing system. Remember, it was made prior to the Cold War as an interceptor for intercept tank bombers originally. So yeah, the A7 had a much better system. I don't know anything about Navy aircraft, but you're bringing back old memories when you talk about barrel roll and Steel Tiger.
Yeah. And I can remember when we were at Cameron Bay, Dwight, talking to some of the pilots there, the F-4Cs out of Cameron. I think they'd come from Florida. And listening to the pilots in the old club and that, they were complaining over the fact that they didn't have Gatling guns, and they basically had missiles. And in the dogfights and that, they were wishing that they had some Gatling guns on board. I don't know if you experienced that or not, but I remember those comments. And the other thing that kind of perturbed me and perturbed them too was sometimes they were only carrying a half a bomb load. There was a shortage of weaponry at the beginning of the war. That's the 500-pound, 750-pound bombs and that. So they'd go out with a half load, and I thought, boy, that's crazy. I don't know why they would even authorize that. But the biggest complaint of all, and I completely understand, was in this war was the crazy idea that we couldn't go after certain SAM sites and after certain airfields in North Vietnam. I mean, the MiGs were on the ground at the airfield, and it was politics, completely politics. We didn't want to agitate Russia or China. We didn't want to kill accidentally any of them. So the MiGs were based at the airfields in the early part of the war, and we couldn't touch them. The SAM missiles, if they thought there was a Russian Soviet technician there, we couldn't touch those. And the craziest thing of all was that most of the military hardware in North Vietnam came from China and Russia. And it came in through the shipping harbor of Hampong. And we couldn't bomb Hampong. We couldn't go after those ships. So you're sitting there at your scope and you're directing aircraft and that, you know, the pilots are frustrated. And you're saying to yourself, is this really a war? It is in the sense that there's combat, but it's not an all-out war to win. You can't win sometimes if you're restricted like this. Very frustrating.
What year where were you at? You were in Vietnam or?
Yeah, Cam Bay, 66.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Cam Bay in 66. And that was crazy too, because we didn't have enough equipment. Dwight will remember this. They sent 4 officers, Dwight, myself, and 2 others, and 21 enlisted men. And we actually hooked into a Hawk missile battalion radar on a sand hill, the south end of Cam Bay. And their radar was miserable compared to ours. We had a hell of a time trying to track aircraft in that. Identify aircraft was something else. But I think it was 7th Air Force thought it was a stopgap measure until they could build a permanent site on Hantre Island, which was off Da Nang. And the crazy thing is, after 4.5 months, we pulled the plug. It just wasn't being successful the way it needed to be. And it wasn't until about a year and a half later that the site on Hantre Island was developed. Meanwhile, as we were leaving, there were enlisted men coming in for assignment at the radar site that now no longer existed. So, talk about FUBAR.
I want to clarify something before jumping to a question here in the chat. And I encourage more questions. I'm happy that they're pouring in. Dwight, you mentioned being up in the air every 3rd day. And my thinking is a weapons controller. We already talked about before the program that weapons controllers were different than air traffic controllers. That was something I didn't know. But it was part of your job to go up in the aircraft and establish targets for missions?
Actually, sometimes we did establish targets. Most of the time, we had a FAC with a target. Some were pre-planned. The 7th Air Force has said, we're going to hit that target at such and such a time with this mission, okay? Now, the FACs sometimes had targets, sometimes they didn't. And we had one guy on our crew, he was a very nice person. He was too nice. He wouldn't browbeat the FACs. So I had to change places with him so I could browbeat the FACs and say, we've got ordnance coming. He says, I have no targets. We say, probe with it. Okay.
Okay.
The FACs really didn't have a target, but every one of them had was sort of a hip pocket list. You know, I saw something at that spot. Maybe there's some activity there. And so they'd throw in a few bombs and see what happens. Most of the time it was what ended up in the battle damage assessment as suspected tree park.
Yeah, I had a lot of those. I got a lot. Were you up in the C-130s and ABCCC?
Yes, right.
Yep. What was the call sign? What was your call sign? Do you remember?
Moonbeam.
Yeah.
That was the
Oh, yeah.
night one.
Yep.
And-
Worked with, I was there in 70, so it was a bit later. But
Okay.
yeah, I worked with Moonbeam and, oh, I can't remember. Candlestick?
Hillsborough will be the daytime. Or
Yeah, Hillsborough. Candlestick? Was that one of them?
Candlestick, I think I
the
was.
Candlestick was a C-123 flare ship, but they would do.
It was just on the radio, so.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Dwight said something I want to follow up on just a little bit. Sitting at a console in a command reporting center, and I was up in Non-Com Phenom, which was a naked fanny for additional training to get a skill level in that. And I had never seen as much aircraft in the sky in my life. I mean, it was like night and day from Dora in Fitzenlook. All we were doing at Dora was 105s basically, and occasionally air refueling. But Non-Com Phenom was like New York City with traffic and that. At one point, I counted 37 aircraft up being controlled in that 12 to 30,000 feet and that. And I have to give a shout out to the B-52s. I mean, we did a lot of air-to-air refueling with those guys, and they were fantastic. They really were. They stuck to their anchors, and they carried a lot of fuel. Usually flights of 3. I think they were limited flights of 3, cells of 3, and they normally came from southern part of Thailand, long haul to get up to their tracks or racetrack and that. But they were great guys to work with, and they saved a lot of pilots, an awful lot of pilots.
You said naked fanny?
Yeah, Non-Com Phenom. The slang for the site was whoever came up with that, I don't know. It was better known as naked fanning, Non-Com Phenom. Invert.
Right. Brad, I want you to chat. Can you unmute? Let's see if I wanted to ask your question.
Yeah, I guess with the weapons control and identifying friend or foe, it seems like some of the missions were kind of hazy. And how did you know for sure? You probably didn't know for sure, but what were your criteria for go or no go? I know there's an urgency to get to get the ordnance off the aircraft, but how close? I mean, how many times did you have a really tough decision to make, and you ever second guess yourself in a decision to drop ordnance?
There were very strict rules of engagement, but in the eastern part of the country of Laos, most of it was a free fire zone, so you could drop ordnance on anything that moved. Anything that was on a motorable road or trail was fair game. If the truck was there, by definition, it was a motorable road or trail. And the facts were very good at identifying. If there was if they were working with people on the ground, the facts knew exactly where they were. And they wouldn't let any ordnance go in if there was danger to our folks on the ground. We didn't do too much of that in Laos, okay? They did up north with Vang Pao's army. As far as identifying aircraft, friend or foe, most of the aircraft that were flying in Southeast Asia were all US, either Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps. And they had identification beacons, and we could interrogate the beacon. It would send back a signal that was coded, and our decoder would tell us what the signal was, and if it was correct, okay, friend. The other thing was friendly by origin. I mean, if it took off from Ubon Airfield, it's friendly. The North Vietnamese rarely sent a fighter aircraft out of North Vietnam. Once in a while they did, but rarely. And the air defense threat in South Vietnam was just about zero. The Hawk missile site that Paul and I were at was closed down a couple of years later. There was just no need for it. The Marine Corps Hawk missile site up at Da Nang was closed down for the same reason. There was no significant air defense threat. Although we did have 102s on alert, Air Force F-102s, usually piloted by Air National Guard pilots who came on for a 90-day tour of duty in Southeast Asia. A lot of the young pilots really liked that. They thought that was great duty.
Why did North Vietnam not send fighters down?
That's a good question, and I think that kind of was 7th Air Force questioning: are we vulnerable? And if so, where are we vulnerable? And will they do it in that? And as controllers, sometimes we would sit there and wonder too, because could they sneak in? Could they, for example, evade our radar systems and that? But basically, I thought we had pretty good radar coverage overall. Even early in the war, we had some pretty detailed coverage.
Brad, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up. I know the North Vietnamese Army and the armed forces were pretty creative. Did you ever hear any false radio signals, any way to, I know sometimes we got a little sloppy and went in the clear, but did you ever come across any North Vietnamese radio traffic trying to imitate U.S. forces?
I never did, but I understand it did happen. And we knew they were listening to us. Okay. When I was on ABCCC, we knew everything we said was being listened to. So, you know, we were careful. For example, you never would pass target coordinates in the clear. You always had to encrypt them to pass them to the pilots, unless it was less than 20 minutes to bomb release. Then you could pass them in the clear, because we figured even if they're listening to us, they can't do anything in 20 minutes to get away from us. But yes, they did listen, and sometimes they did spoof. But they did not use electronic jamming, as far as I know. I never heard any. I never saw any. The only electronic jamming I ever saw came from our own B-52s.
When you say spoof, what does that mean?
I'm sorry?
When you say spoof, what does that mean?
Oh, that means to fake a signal.
Okay. Larry Kilmeyer asked here in the chat, did either of you work with the Army Crazy Cats out of CRB?
Never.
No.
I never did.
No. Another part of this story that should be told is we had a radar site. We didn't know about it at the time. I don't think Dwight did. I certainly didn't, call Lima 85. It was actually up in Laos, up on the mountaintop. And the site had a look-see clear into Hanoi. It was the only radar site that we had that looked clear over into Hanoi. And it was hell getting it built, because we weren't supposed to be in Laos. And finally, what they did to get it kind of around not having military people there, Lima Site 85. There it is, right up there. They got U.S. personnel that were highly qualified with a radar, and they rifted them out of the military, got them over to Lockheed, and Lockheed hired them as civilians with the idea that when the mission was complete, they could go back into the military. So they hired, and this is a rough estimate, I believe they hired something like 44, 46 personnel to operate Lima Site 85 and that. So that worked brilliantly for many months, because what we could do is, in inclement weather, we could take the 105s over and they could bomb Hanoi. But what happened was it finally got attacked. And I guess the idea being, when they put it on the mountaintop, it was so steep on three sides that they thought that no enemy could attack the site. But as we learned later on, Vietnam, North Vietnamese, they had a specially trained group that scaled one of the sides of the mountain, got up there and started shooting and killed 11, I believe it was 11 of the men that were presently at the station. And we were able to get our helicopters in and rescue, I think, about 8 of them. And ultimately,
it was Air America helicopters. It was not our helicopters. The Air Force would not go there.
Okay, good to know. But we later bombed the site to get rid of the equipment, so the North Vietnamese couldn't get a hold of it, and that turned out to be information that wasn't known for years and years.
Talk about this map a touch. It seems to me that these were all radar sites that the U.S. was running.
Yes.
Yes, 1967, these were the sites that we had. There were a total, I believe, of 17 radar sites.
And we had authorization, or we were allowed to run the one in Laos and in Thailand, obviously.
Thailand for sure. Laos was kind of touch and go. Civilians could operate it, but military couldn't, supposedly. Although we had CIA there also at Lima site 85. Yeah, that was interesting in that. In fact, there was a Congressional Medal of Honor awarded to one of the members. He was rescuing people, putting them on a helicopter, got on the helicopter himself, and then went up through the floor of the helicopter and killed him as they were evacuating the area. Yeah, it's quite interesting. There's another area over here, if you see on the right-hand side, where it says Waterboy, DMZ, Panama, Monkey Mountain. Mm-hmm. That was another whole very interesting complex, because the Marines manned a site there, and the Air Force manned a site, and combined with information received from Air Force, or I'm sorry, from the Navy, from an aircraft carrier out in the South China Sea, they were combining all that information and relaying it to airborne aircraft. Dwight, do you know anything about that in more detail? That came about after I had already left Vietnam.
Yes, it was called, the call sign was Motel, and they had what was basically an Air Force, a U.S. Air Force Buick site, that backup intercept control that we had in the United States. And they had many sources of input. They had the cruiser in the Gulf. They even had some trail watchers, and they actually had people in North Vietnam watching the airfield. They were usually Filipinos doing that. It was quite an operation, and it was reasonably effective. It saved B-52s.
Yeah, very top secret at the time.
Yes, very much. Yes.
Larry?
Yeah, I didn't know about that there was someone in North Vietnam. I'm unaware of that. I was there in 1970. The Monkey Mountain was the one that would give the radio calls on guard if an airplane took off, or there were bandits, or the B-52s were going to drop in a certain area, and then just go out. And guard is the frequency that everybody monitors, 2430 UHF. We only had UHF radios. But I never worked with the Lima Site 85. I don't remember when that went down, but before I got there, I think.
Right,
but
it was.
You asked something, Sean. If you look at the picture, that's a good picture. There are no radar sites in Laos.
No, there were none.
Except for that Lima site up north. So the other ones are all along the Thai border or something. Yeah. So they weren't there. I just want to make a comment about we talked to ABCCC, Airborne Command and Control Center. I think I got that right.
Yes.
And they were lifesavers. What time is it? If I could just give a scenario from my end as to how they worked with us.
Sure.
I was at Korat, Thailand, which is in the middle of Thailand. I don't know if you even have it on there, but I was there north of Bangkok, and we would take off and contact the radar folks that sent us to the tanker. So we refuel almost every mission. We'd have to refuel before we went in, and then you'd contact Dwight or whoever was airborne at the time on ABCCC on the C-130 to get your targets. Now, sometimes we had a target before we left, and they know about this, but most of the time you'd contact this airborne command post and talk to these guys, and they would give you the target or give you a forward air controller, a FAC, to hand you off to the forward air controller who would find a target. And then on the way back, we'd contact them to also, and I think we gave you the BDA, didn't we? I think we also passed the BDA to you.
Yes, that's right.
Battle damage assessment. and tell them what, so they could start putting it into the big plan and the master plan. And of course, not all of those were exaggerated, as we well know. The amount of people that I think we killed outnumbered the whole of Southeast Asia. But anyway, but it was always pumped up a little bit because you didn't know. But it worked real well when I was there in 1970 with the radar sites. And I'll give you one example. If you look at the north, where Hanoi is, and you look southwest of Hanoi, there's a little area that sticks out. That was called the Fish's Mouth. And that's it. Can you see a Fish's Mouth there? There was a road that came out of North Vietnam going westbound into Laos, picked up the Ho Chi Minh Trail and went all the way down the Ho Chi Minh Trail to South Vietnam. But I was way up north one time, and that's called Barrel Roll, up in the north part of Laos, of escorting a C-130 that was doing, I think we're clear here. Yeah, we are. Julia can understand the language. They were doing what we called a bullshit drop, where they would drop pamphlets along the border of North Vietnam to try to tell them, hey, let it go, give up, and all that kind of stuff. There was actually, and this is the only time I ever came close, there was actually 2 MiG-21s that took off out of Hanoi heading towards us, heading just directly west. And they were going, again, pilot talk, the speed of stink. So we, holding further to the west of the C-130 so we can give out their position, were cleared to intercept them. So we went as fast as you can go, heading towards the MiG-21s. And the only reason we know it's a MiG-21 is because they knew where it took off from, and they knew a MiG-21's there. Right to the border. Now, I was in the back seat, as everybody knows, on the radar, locked on to the airplanes, and we came to the North Vietnam border, and we were not cleared to fire. And I think you two understand this. We could not, and they turned around is what they did. The MiG-21s turned around, never came into Laos, turned around and went back right on the radar, and we could not get clearance to fire. And I think you guys understand how that came about. That was, Sean, that's our rules of engagement.
Well,
so they went back and they landed, and then they shot down some B-52s later or whatever. But very frustrating. And I'm sure you guys have talked about frustration when you can't hit a target that you know.
I'll tell you, you sit at that scope and you just think about it. And it is so frustrating in that, and you begin to question after a period of time, what are we doing here? What kind of a war is this anyway? I mean, are we out to win? And of course, like you say, maybe a B-52 got shot down, maybe the pilot didn't, make it back in that. And what can you do about it? You're completely helpless in that. I've got to read you another quote about the whole system in that, because this was in my book and this was just incredible to me, but it's very true. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger described this Air Force command and control system matrix as institutionalized schizophrenia. President Richard Nixon agreed that this matrix made effective command and control of air operations extremely difficult. And unfortunately, it turned out to be too cumbersome to completely reorganize before the conclusion of the Vietnam War. So it was not only the system, but it was the politics too that we were fighting.
Larry, quick follow-up to your story is when you knew the MiGs were coming after you guys, other than the anger of not being able to engage with them, what were you thinking when you knew the MiGs were coming? Like, engagement was imminent?
I was hoping. I mean, we were in 1970, it was peacetime. You probably know that we were not bombing North Vietnam in 1970. We're for 3 years, 2.5 years, maybe we couldn't go up to North Vietnam and bomb them. I was in North Vietnam to escort and take pictures of the airfields, but that was our escort an airplane, escort the RF reconnaissance aircraft. But we weren't allowed to drop anything. And that's another reason why we weren't allowed to go into North Vietnam to shoot down these MiG-21s.
Didn't the F-4Cs, though, when the war was over, didn't they score the highest kill ratio against MiGs?
In 72 on. but not earlier than, not while you were there.
Okay.
Again, they had C models, F4s that didn't have a gun, although they did strap a gun on the belly of the airplane that wasn't bore sighted hardly at all. So it only shot that way, who knows where. But I flew E models out of Karat, which had an internal gun. So I was pretty lucky. But
I felt bad for the 105 pilots out of Tockley. We would flight following that. They would carry a bomb load in and that, and if the MiGs jumped them, and they usually knew they were coming, and that I'm told that the 105 just didn't have the maneuverability that some of the MiGs did. And I think they pulled them out of the war. The losses were so high that they pulled them out of the war.
Yeah, they kind of replaced them with F4s. They were still flying in 70 when I was there, but they were doing Wild Weasel and other things. They shut down Tockley and moved over to Karat while I was there. I'll leave it go after this, Sean, if it's okay. But you talked about not being able to shoot down a MiG-21. I had a roommate at that time in 1970. I was a backseat navigator, a weapons systems officer. He was a backseat pilot, went back to the States, upgraded to the front seat of the F4 to become, they call him an aircraft commander. Came back in 1972, back to Karat in the 469th Attack Fighter Squadron. Got shot down by a MiG-21, was a POW for a year and a half.
Wow.
I don't know. I'm sure it wasn't the same MiG-21. However, that's just like you said. I couldn't shoot him down. He got shot down in 72.
Wow.
Got out in 73, of course, when they all got out. Anyway, I'll be quiet. But thank you. I just want to thank you too. It's very exciting. The tactical air control system is what we're all talking about. Was cumbersome. But I can tell you what, these guys on the ground, and I never talked to them on the ground, but in ABCCC were outstanding. Thank you for keeping me alive. I appreciate it.
Could I add to this a little bit?
Of course.
Well, we've got the map up. The easternmost sites in Thailand and the northernmost sites in South Vietnam, their main function was controlling aerial refueling. Oh, yes, I just saw a map there of the...
Yeah, let's switch. There you go.
There we go. There we go.
There are the anchors. Yeah.
Right, those are the anchors. And at Lion, I spent 2 years at Lion in Ubon. We had 20 or 21 controllers, and that's mainly what everyone did. We just ran tanker rendezvous after tanker rendezvous. It was just incredible. At one time at Lion, we were running 60% of the daily tanker rendezvous in Southeast Asia. It was just a good place to be. Anybody going from Thailand into Steel Tiger, well, they went by the Cherry Anchor, and that was Lion.
Yeah.
We also worked a anchor down in Cambodia when we went into Cambodia. And that
I'm missing where Lion is. Is that I see Ubon here.
Right.
Yeah, the north,
Right.
Just north of Ubon, up in there. Yeah.
the one that goes north-south.
This one.
Oh, I thought you meant the one over by Udorn.
Okay. The tanker anchors changed depending on the mission. If they were going north, the missions went. Let me see. The anchors pointed north. If they're going into Laos, they pointed northeast. You can see the difference in the map there.
So these tankers would just take off and make this circle, constantly refueling.
They would go to the orbit, but the controller actually controlled the tanker as well as the fighters.
And the reason for that is you might have bad weather along the way, so it might be necessary to change altitude. You might have some pilots coming back that had battle damage, and you need to shift the position, hook up quicker. Yeah, it was fairly common to talk to the pilots to change position if need.
How many planes would you be in charge of on a given shift? Could that vary? Could it be overwhelming in a sense? 50, more?
I would no, not 50. Go ahead, Dwight. Sitting on the ground, I think the maximum I ever controlled at one time was something like 14 or 15 aircraft.
Right, or maybe into the low 20s. And when you're doing that, you're not actually controlling all of them. You're doing mainly flight following.
Okay, which means
Close controlling, like for the tanker anchors, you might have the tanker and maybe 2 or 3 flights at once.
Mhm.
And
Right.
the reason that they had controllers doing the refueling, the pilots could have done it. They had a radar, but it's kind of like having an experienced traffic cop at an intersection. Okay, if there's no control, well, people will get through the intersection one way or the other. But if you have an experienced traffic cop there, traffic will run smoothly and quickly. And that's what we were doing. We were making sure that the fighters got on the tanker quickly and got off quickly. And
I can't tell you the number of times fighter aircraft would be under my control and they would say bingo fuel, which meant they were close to being out of fuel. They had to hook up now.
I'm going to challenge those comments because without you, the F4 can do its own intercept,
oh, yes.
but not that well. I mean, you're coming in as pretty fast, and you got to turn the tanker. So you find the tanker not head on, but you find them behind him. Now, without what you were doing, it was not impossible, but it was much more less safe. They would get you on the tanker, and you just go right up and get right on the tanker. You'd come right into the boom, hit the boom, refuel, and be on your way either home or back out. I flew 99 night missions with Spectre up and down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So we were on and off the tanker 2 or 3 times a night. These guys were outstanding, John. Don't let them kid you.
well,
They were.
I don't know about anybody else in the room, but there are a lot of things that that I'm learning tonight. Is just like you're saying, Larry, that I don't even think about this necessarily as a civilian. Is that you got to go hit the tanker? I think the fighter comes in, kind of swerves around, and hooks up with it. No, you guys, Dwight, Paul, it was your job to get the tanker in line so that the fighter would just come right into it, just like you're saying, Larry, right into the boom.
That's correct. Right. Make it as quick as you can because they were short of fuel.
Boy, okay, so that boils down to like a really main question here is how the skill set to be able to do that, to be able to, you're working how many ever flights in the air at the same time, knowing that this guy's running out of fuel, the emergency of like, that takes priority. I need to get this guy lined up so he's coming in and can get refueled to continue the mission. Boy, what was that like sitting in the chair and getting all of those things to it'd be like orchestra. It'd be like being the conductor at a symphony.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
I think Dwight said something that's very true. To be good at this, you have to be able to visualize. You're sitting at your scope and you can visualize a lot of this that's going on. And if you can do that, you can pretty well control the situation short of a major emergency and that. And most of the fellows I worked with were pretty good at visualizing this.
I want to ask, this sort of maybe jumps back into your stories a bit, but do you remember, because this seems like it takes a lot of patience, very high stress situations, do you remember your first night on shift whenever all of it hit the fan and you realized, wow, okay, this is very serious?
Well, the training programs were quite good. You didn't just go in and sit down and start working traffic. You went in and you watched, and then you sat in the scope and you had an instructor controller sit beside you until the instructor controller figured you were safe. You'll probably get all the intercepts, but you won't kill anybody in the process.
One other thing that you haven't mentioned yet, but I want to mention because it was significant. The UPA scope sets that we sat at and worked had 114 tubes, and they had pull-out racks that you would replace the tubes. Now think of the heat generated by that. So when you're sitting in a command reporting center, you've got tremendous amount of air conditioning. Okay, these are the enlisted men working the radio sets and that. And by the way, let me say something about the enlisted men. We couldn't have done our job at all without the expertise of these guys. I mean, they kept the equipment operational. And it hasn't been said yet, but when you sat at a scope, there was a technician, an enlisted man sitting next to you, controlling the radios and the landlines. So there were actually two of you on the ground working in that. Because if you're at the scope and you're watching the radar and you're controlling the aircraft, you don't have time to turn around and try to adjust frequencies on radios and handle landlines. So that's why you have a tech sitting next to you.
You might have time to turn around and take a picture. Just checking.
You might. So this is Cameron Bay, and this. We only had two scopes. Remember, this is the beginning of the war, and we lacked a lot of equipment. You want to flip to the picture of the Quonset hut that we built. It should be no, we're in. No, that's Dora. That's Thailand. Nope.
Hopefully, I have it.
There we are.
Okay.
That was our Quonset hut. This is the Hawk Missile Battalion radar, which wasn't worth a damn as far as we were concerned. So we're sitting in here with our two scopes. These, of course, are radio towers and that. And it is hotter than blazes coming out of that, the tubes and that. And you've got this tremendous amount of air conditioning blowing on you. So you're either hot or cold, nowhere in between. And then when you're done with your shift, if you come out in daylight, you've got to have sunglasses or you're going to go blind. It's crazy. It's really crazy in that. Now, this particular site at Port Call, Cameron Bay, the wind would come along and this is all sand. So everything got sandy. And the maintenance men, I take my hat off to them. It was a nightmare to keep the filters and everything operational with all of this sand in that. I mean, hell, we had sand in our food when we were bivouacked with the Army and that. It got pretty bad. I remember getting my toothpaste out and brushing my teeth and saying, oh, hell, there's sand in my toothpaste.
Makes you never want to go to the beach again.
Wow.
Speaking of, you said something about when there wasn't an emergency. Can both of you recall your first emergency that you dealt with, and what was it?
Dwight, you go first.
Well, I don't think we ever worked an emergency at Port Call in Vietnam. We did some going into Tok Lee, and as air traffic controllers say, there's no emergency on final, okay? You handle them the same way you do everybody else, unless you're trying to find a tanker to refuel them or somebody to join up with them to escort them in. It's limited what you can do. You can't reach up and control the aircraft. And you do everything you can to help the air crew. Sometimes giving them a steer to the base, sometimes finding them and telling them where they are because they don't always know. I had an emergency air crew called, said that he couldn't talk to the pilot. He was backseater. He couldn't talk to the pilot. All he could see was blood on the canopy. He didn't know where he was. He knew he was northbound. That's all he knew. So we gave him a hold down on the radio. Using our direction finder, we got an azimuth to him, and there was only one aircraft on that azimuth. So I knew where he was. And then we had an aircraft called Amtrak. I think it was an RF. Escorted him into Ubon, got down near Ubon, and the command post at Ubon asked the guy, was he a pilot or a nav? And he said he was a nav. And they said, we really don't want you trying to land here. Go outside a ways and punch out. And he did. And the pilot was dead. He'd been hit by a 23 over Cambodia.
And I did have an emergency at Port Call, Dwight.
That was at Lion.
Okay, you probably don't remember this one and that, but it was a Sky Raider out of Da Nang. And what happened is he got over north of Da Nang, taking off with a full load of armament in that. And he called in a Mayday emergency in that on 243. And he said he
have to bail out. And you could hear, when he keyed the mic, you could hear the engine sputtering.
and that. Well, he told me 3 different times he was bailing out in that, but he also asked for a bearing back to the base in that, because he was Popeye. Popeye is parlance for in the clouds. And what it turned out to be, I think, was that his, and I'm somewhat second guessing this, but I think his flight mechanic, instead of putting the dipstick in his tank to assure that he had a full load of fuel, just looked at the gauge. The gauge said he had plenty of fuel in that. So he ran out of fuel. And long story short, he made it back on his own to the base and landed, but I guess he failed to discharge his ordnance before he landed in that. So it caused quite a stir in that. But that was my first emergency in that. And it was kind of, from that point on, I was kind of tense waiting for one. And over a period of time, I heard of different emergencies. I would flight follow. There was an F-4C coming back that had sustained some damage in that, but nothing major, no accidents. And that's another thing I need to say. When I summarized my book, what I said was, I never knew of any weapons controller or heard of any weapons controller that did cause any damage whatsoever. Everybody was highly professional. We worked well together as a team in that. And as far as I know, we didn't cause any act, and we could have very easily, by giving improper information, have created a chaotic situation, but we didn't in that. But I'm sure there are weapons controllers that really handled detailed emergencies in that, because if you stop to think about it, you've got a pilot, let's say in a fighter aircraft, returning looking for help, and his only contact is the person he's talking to on the ground or maybe airborne is a weapons controller. Big responsibility.
How do you remain calm in those situations?
You don't. You're tense. You're sweating. You're nervous. You're uncomfortable.
Now you tell me. I'll tell you what, they didn't sound nervous.
Well, we tried not to. We tried desperately not to in that. But after it was all over, we went and had a beer.
And that was going to be another question of mine. It's sort of this leads into. Go ahead, Larry.
Just one beer? Okay.
Just one beer. Because it depends on how big the emergency was.
Right.
You think about first responders here in the States, and I would think that the weapons controllers, the air traffic controllers, you guys were kind of first responders for those guys up in the air. And what was that like? I'm sure that was the most tense experience of the job is, these guys who had damage to the plane, who were running out of fuel, who were, might have a co-pilot or a pilot that has been hit or killed. And you guys are the ones on the ground that are bringing them back home. What was having that responsibility like?
Go ahead, Dwight. What did you say?
You did what you knew. And you got to get them to an airfield. You got to find them first, because a lot of times they don't know where they are. And then get them headed toward an airfield and see if they're going to make it. You might put a tanker nearby in case they need a tanker. I've run people in to the airfield, handed them over to approach control, but I had a tanker right over the guy. So, if he couldn't make the airfield, he could just pop up and hit the tanker. And you just learn what to do, and you do it. And yeah, you do get nervous, but you keep it controlled, that's all.
John, I hate to keep talking, but these guys did such a good job. In the States now, under commercial flying, it is far different than what they did and I did over during the Vietnam War.
That's
what
good,
I
Larry.
mean
Larry, you're actually reading my mind, because that was my next question was give context to air traffic controllers versus this.
It's the situation that they were in and I was in is tactical, which means it's continuously changing all the time. And you have to adjust to the change and make a correct decision. And of course, we were doing the same thing, but they were doing the very much same thing. They would come up and they thought, hey, everything's great. and then the shit would hit the fan. And they would have to be able to know from experience or training what to do to solve the situation. It's complete. And I flew for US Air for 16 years. This system we have in the United States under the FAA is extremely safe. The system that we were working under in Vietnam was not safe. But because of the controllers, and I'm talking from my side of it, of course, I did our part too, but they were right on top of it. I mean, if you called up and said, I need a tanker, and you said, the term we used was bingo fuel. Bingo fuel means I don't have enough to get to the base I came from, you know, and they would immediately come up, turn right, heading, there it is, tanker, you know, whatever miles, 40 miles on the nose. It wasn't like a whole, let me think. No, it was right there.
Yeah.
That I can't say, and I wish I could, I'll see you guys in person sometime and thank you, but no, they were right on top of it. And I do not know of an incident at all that caused anything, even, you know, anything to go wrong. I'm in the year I was there, and I flew 99 night missions. And by the way, it's dark at night, and you can't see anything, and you can't see the tanker either until you get pretty close. So I just want to thank you. You know, that's far different than what we experience now in flying commercial, which is very safe and very structured.
Yeah.
Was not structured in the things that they were with and I was with. But again,
Well,
thank you. Thank you.
I mentioned my dad was, you know, an air traffic controller, and, you know, we talk about tobacco free, you know, our sponsor, and my dad's been a smoker his whole life. And you know, knowing what he has to go sit down at, you know, for 10 hours or, you know, do overnight shifts, and he was just working commercial. It seemed like it was a very stressful job. It's very, you know, you're responsible for a lot of lives, despite how organized the FAA has that system. You know, that responsibility, I think, can weigh very heavily on somebody to know, like, and I always joke with him that it's like if you worked at McDonald's, you don't want to eat the hamburgers. Well, he never wants to fly. He refuses to fly.
Hey, I got a civilian kind of story to tell just a little bit. Well, it isn't really civilian. It was non-combat. We'll put it that way. When I was at Dora, the monsoon season occurred, and you know, when the monsoon season occurs, you've got rain in your scope. I mean, most of the flights are, you know, in trouble with that amount of rain, and we're waiting. We're taking our shoes off to get to the command and control center. You've never seen as much rain as the monsoon season in that. So one night I'm sitting at my scope, and here comes a DC-3 from Chiang Mai, northern Thailand, down to Bangkok. I guess they call it the embassy run. And the pilot calls me, Dora, he said, can you route me through the least amount of rain? So I'm looking at my scope and there is a kind of a channel. And if I route him down through that, he's not going to have as much monsoon rain. So I direct him down that way. He's going down while the weather changed dramatically. Suddenly, the route I gave him is filling up with rain tremendously. I'm listening to him, and I hear him talk to the co-pilot. He asked the co-pilot for a box of Kleenex because rain was coming through his side window. He had to stuff Kleenex in to keep the rain. I mean, they were in hell. They were bouncing up and down. There wasn't a thing I could do. I was listening to them. If they had an emergency, I was going to do everything I could to get them down safely. But the tech I was working with, I turned to him and I said, aren't you glad we aren't up there tonight? Thank God. Talk about miserable. So anyway.
There is a special relationship that, from what I've learned from my dad, between the controllers and the pilots.
Yeah.
And there seems to be a fair bit of ribbing that kind of happens over the radio. Did that happen a lot in Vietnam?
What do you think, Dwight?
Well, yes, there was, yeah. And of course,
I think so too. Yeah.
We played back and forth. I won a drink off a pilot, an F4 pilot who didn't know his wings folded. And of course, one of the most amusing incidents that I worked, an EB-66 coming out of Karat going for the Cherry tanker. Didn't seem to be doing very well. So I asked him, what's your true airspeed? He says, I'm sorry, indicated airspeed. He said 260. And I said, the tanker's going 275. He was never going to catch it.
To get back and loop back to the book, Inherently Dangerous, I just put the link in the chat here about where people can pick it up. You know, we've talked with a lot of veteran authors and have a few here on the program tonight too. But Paul, why did you decide to write the book?
Well, when I did research and tried to go online and find information about weapons controlling, particularly in Vietnam, I found virtually nothing. And I thought, this is really odd. And I spent a couple years looking at different sites. I contacted a few people that were in the career field. But again, nobody could give me a good picture of what Southeast Asia was like for weapons controlling. So I said, okay, I'm going to take it upon myself to do some research and put together a book. It took me about 18 months to write it and I'm glad I did, because I've received a lot of comments from people that saying, thank you for doing that, because we're kind of like the unsung heroes, if you will, out there. Nobody really talks much about us and that's understandable. I don't think we want accolades. I don't think we did that career field thinking that we were going to get it. We were there to help as best we could to make sure that our air crews were as safe as they could be. And that's the satisfaction I got when I wrote the book, is knowing that our air crews were helped out.
What was the biggest thing you learned in your research?
A lot of strange things in that war. A lot of strange things. Mm-hmm. We planted more bombs in Laos than we did Vietnam, which is really weird. The CIA had a war going in Laos that most Americans at the time knew nothing about. I knew a little bit, having been at Non-Com Phanom. When I first got there, and remember now, I had come from Port Call in Vietnam to Dora in central Thailand, and now I went up for training up in northeastern Thailand, the Non-Com Phanom and that. And suddenly I'm seeing all kinds of exotic aircraft at the airport. And I'm seeing on the radar screen all kinds of air traffic over Laos. And I'm thinking, what in the hell is going on here? Well, that's where I learned about the war in Laos and that. A lot of crazy stuff. One of the pilots told me that Vinh Tin, the capital, we had Air America loading supplies and dropping them off to the Laotian forces, which were pro-democracy, and the communists were using the same runway, same airport, and loading up materials and taking off and dropping it to the communist forces. I mean, what kind of a war is this? It's just bizarre. And there were a lot of things like that. So as I reflect back on it, I'm glad I wrote the book, because I learned a lot in my research and talked to a lot of interesting people in that. But I hope we learned some lessons in that war, that we never, ever get involved in doing some of the things we do in that. My personal opinion, if we have to go to war as a last resort, let's win it. Let's not go in and have all kinds of rules and regulations and that inhibit our people. We lost a lot of good people because of that. An awful lot of good men and women.
Do both of you come from military families?
No.
No, not at all.
Did your service, go ahead, Dwight.
No, my uncles were in World War II, of course, but just for the duration. It's not a military family at all. We're all farmers.
Did your family become a military family? Do either of you have kids that joined?
No.
And Dwight, or not Dwight, sorry, Paul, after you wrote the book, did your family decide to read it? Did they have questions about your service afterwards?
Well, my mother and father were already deceased when I wrote the book. My sons, I have 2 sons and 2 daughters. They weren't particularly interested. What I found is that veterans are interested as a general rule to learn more information in that. But there's a big segment of the public out there that looks upon the Vietnam War with some disdain. It was a sad war, and probably because the feeling is we lost the war. We didn't achieve the goals that we set out to achieve, and that. And that's borne out by the fact when I came back and got off the plane at Travis Air Force Base, they warned us to get into our civilian clothes as soon as we could. And I can remember on the bus going out from the base, signs being held up in that, and baby killers and people spitting. And it was quite a shocker to come back and see a good segment of American against the war the way it was. But in a way, I understand it.
Last week we had the Vietnam War Veterans Day, and Todd gave a really great, opening speech when we were at Soldiers and Sailors at our in-person event last week, talking about how that wrong has never really been righted, but we have this day now to celebrate and honor Vietnam War veterans. Does that day mean something to both of you?
Dwight, does it mean anything to you?
Sometimes when someone says thank you for your service, I'm tempted to punch them out and say, where were you 50 years ago?
Yes, it means something to me. It definitely does. And I have had, like Dwight, I've had people tell me that, and I appreciate it. And that I think as more time passes, more people come to understand more about the war and the sacrifices that were made and the appreciation in that. But it's taken a long time coming.
I don't think it's that at all. It's that we have an all-volunteer force, and we don't want to badmouth the military because we wouldn't get anybody in.
Well, does anyone here, if anyone has any other questions for our guests tonight, and Dwight and Paul, I want to thank you both for coming on and telling your stories and sharing with us. And, I hope that people pick up this book. It's a very good read. It's a little over 100 pages, but if you notice tonight, there were several terms that you guys used, and Larry, not least of which was speed of stink, that I'm sure and I'm going to ask you about it another time, but a lot of terms in there that I'm glad that you do have a glossary here in the back, because there does seem to be like air traffic control speak that I was like, wait a minute, what's that term? But great read. I hope people here tonight pick it up. Thank you so much, both of you, for coming on the program. And I know, Dwight, also that your service extended well beyond Vietnam. And if you'd love to come back on the program again sometime, we'd like to dive into that history as well.
Well, thank you very much for having us. Rarely ever get a chance to even talk about it.
Yeah, we do.
Both, of course, you're both welcome anytime. Go ahead, Paul.
I'm sorry, Paul. I will get the book. I don't have much time to read. I will get your book and I will read it.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it.
And I'll send it to you to get you to sign it. But
and Dwight, it's glad to see you in person. 54 years.
Well, we will be back. Actually, let me pull this up real quick here. We are going to be back on Wednesday morning. This is going to be our first in-person event at Seven Oaks Country Club in Beaver County. If you have not registered for that event yet, you can do that by emailing Betty at veteransbreakfastclub.org, or there's a phone number to call. Go to, VBC veteransbreakfastclub.org/events. You'll find all of our events listed there, and you'll find out how to register for Wednesday morning's in-person breakfast. Looking forward to seeing some of you there, but we will be back next Monday night. Thank you again, everyone, for a wonderful evening. Larry?
Can I just ask one question? I don't want to put a damper on it, but you mentioned, asked the question about Vietnam War Veterans Day and what we thought about it. Mm-hmm. It reminded me of something, and we won't have to do it now. Do you have a count of how many non-Vietnam veterans attended the Soldiers and Sailors function? I'm just curious if that existed. if you don't know where I'm coming from, I think you figured it out. We had an event at Beaver County, and I asked that question, and there were 3 non-Vietnam era veterans of about 30 or so more. That's all. I'll leave it at that. I think everybody understands why I'm asking the question. But I'm just wondering, and I don't want to ask it Wednesday in public, but maybe privately. I'd just be curious if there's a count. Just for us.
No, I appreciate that, and I'll ask Todd to see if we do have a count for that.
Yeah. Thanks again for everybody. I'll be quiet now. Thank you very much, Paul, Dwight.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
If it counts, Larry, Henry Shepke was watching live on the YouTube channel. So thank you, Henry. Thank you all. We'll be back next Monday. We'll see you all then. Have a great night, everybody.